Okay, so welcome. We will start with just an introduction of everyone that's here. So if we could start on my left and move around the circle.
Bulawanaka, my name is Siriana Naipi. I'm named after my great-grandmother who raised my mother in the village of Makinda in Neta City in Fiji. My last name is my husband's. His family come from Awasali and Tamakatonga in Niue. I've come to Canada or Turtle Island via Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm the Associate Director of All My Relations at Thompson Rivers University and Indigenous Wellness Research Centre.
Talo Falava, Tēnā koutou katoa, and in the Indigenous language of this unceded territory where we're meeting today, Waitwikwaite, Arenians West. My name is Areni. I am the Dean of Education and Social Work here at Thompson Rivers University. My ancestry is Samoan, so from the Pacific itself, and into Pākehā, so into the non-Indigenous side. I have come from Aotearoa, New Zealand to here to Canada, and look forward to talking today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Baldev Kunu. I'm the Dean for Trades and Technology here at TIU. I'm born in India and lived in the UK and now make my home here in British Columbia. I'm privileged to live on the First Nations lands and territories here, where my family, including my daughter, my son, and my wife, have lived and flourished on the lands here. Thank you.
My name is Satwinder Paul. I was born in India as well, but moved to Ontario, Thunder Bay, then eventually to Calgary, Alberta, and did all my university there, and then here in British Columbia. I'm a lecturer and a program coordinator for water and wastewater technology.
My name is Heather Hamilton. I was born on this territory, the Sawatun land, traditional lands. I didn't live here for very long, maybe a couple of months, and then spent the remainder of my life down in Vancouver, and I came back here about 20 years ago. So I'm honored to be back on the territory. I am the manager of industry and contract training for the School of Trades and Technology.
Okay, so the first big one is, what is your vision for Indigenous education for the next 10 years?
Well, to understand the vision, I think we have to understand Indigenous education. And to understand Indigenous education, we need to understand Indigenous. So is it right if we actually go that direction? So when I think about the term Indigenous, I think about the 370 million people around our planet who are Indigenous, and how it's possible to have distinctiveness and also unity in that greatness, in that vastness. So to put it in a far too simple way, Indigenous can mean the first peoples of a place. The first peoples historically, socially, culturally, linguistically of a place. And in that sense of belonging and coming from one place within this greatness of our earth as one place itself. When I think of Indigenous, I think of myself. And I think of a time when I went to my father, and I think I was around 10-ish. My father was reading the evening newspaper, as he would in those days. Was that me? To you? Oh, there we go. All right. So when I think of Indigenous, I think of myself. And I think of a time when I went to see my father. And I may have been 10 years old at the time. My father was reading the evening newspaper, as happened in those days. And I stood facing the newspaper and I said to him, Dad, I don't know what I am. Am I Samoan? Am I European, as we would say in New Zealand? Am I a girl? Am I a teenager? I don't know. What am I? And his newspaper rustled a little bit, and then he closed it and put it to one side, and he looked at me and he said, well, my dear, I would hope that you are all of those things, but most of all, I would hope that you are Irene. And so when I think about Indigenous, I think about this incredible ability to come from somewhere, to be able to reach out and to belong collectively and yet also uniquely. And I do think about how, in the biggest picture possible, if we were to look at planet Earth from the space, we would all actually be indigenous to Earth in some sense. So from that picture of Indigenous, I then think about Indigenous education. And my colleagues here, they'll add in to how we think about Indigenous education. But for me, it's about conveying that sense of belonging, of personal and collective identity, of historical, physical rights, and it is about an ability to actually embrace that way of belonging with an openness, which means that we can all learn together. So in that sense, what is going to work well in terms of teaching and learning with and for Indigenous peoples is actually going to be instructive and important for all of us. And where one Indigenous child is able to succeed in stunning ways, in literacy and maths and technology and dance, however it may be, we have an opportunity to learn and to all succeed because of that. So my vision then of Indigenous education over the next 10 years is one in which there will be success for all, in which there we'll be able to say that success for all means all. And we know that our education system has not done well by all our Indigenous students here in British Columbia, across Canada, across the world, into Aotearoa, New Zealand. We know that we could do better. So this agenda of finding success for all is going to take every area of education, from pre-K, K through 12, and post-secondary and beyond, to make this happen. And it's going to take all of us coming together here in Thompson Rivers University, here in British Columbia, here in the world. And why we want to do that is because everybody deserves to have success. At its core, Indigenous education teaches us about the fulfillment of potential. And we're all motivated by that. We're crazy enough to still have hope that this is possible. I was with a group of educators a couple of weeks ago, and we were learning about indigenizing our own place of education. And here in this area, and we service particularly School District 73 and our companion school districts. For School District 73, in order to reach parity, we need, by one measure, to have 50 more Indigenous students graduate from high school successfully. We walked in and we saw the number 50 there. And that will get us to parity. That is one form of measuring success. So we learned in that day with education leaders from across School District 73, 110, 120 or so people, and my own colleagues from Thompson Rivers University, how we might go about achieving that. It's basically 2 more students per school. And this crazy metaphor came through from from one of the educators there. She said, I never knew that it could be so close, that we could do this. We could work together and we could achieve what is written in the Truth and Reconciliation's Course to Action to close education achievement gaps within one generation. Well, we're saying it's not going to take 30 years. It's going to take 3 to 4 years only, if we work together. And so this educator said, I can't help it, Irene, but it's making me think about the last time that I gave birth to my child. I was in the birthing room. I was bearing down on my child. I was exhausted. And I said to the nurse beside me, I've got nothing left. I can't do any more. And she said, I can see the baby's head. She said, reach round and touch. So she reached round, she touched the baby's head, and suddenly there was this a rush of adrenaline. This is really going to happen. I can do this. I have strength. We're all going to pull together. And she was able to push down, and the baby came out, and the baby was fully healthy. And she said that to me when I look at this number 50, and I see how close we are, closer than we thought. That is how I see Indigenous education right here today. And that's what we're about here at Thompson Rivers University. In a way, we're reaching around and we're saying, we can see this. We've been working at it for years, but we can really see this now. And we want to share whatever we can to help, because others are seeing it too.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add what the vision for Indigenous education over the next 10 years is?
When you ask me that, I think about a Tongan poet, Konai Thaman, and she was reflecting on her journey as a Tongan in the University of Auckland in Aotearoa, and she talked about having to leave a lei or a flower garland in Albert Park, which is the park next to the university, before she came into class. And she's talking about that as an idea of leaving your culture at the door. I think Indigenous education is very much about ensuring Indigenous students can bring their culture into the educational space and it can thrive and it can be accepted, but also about teaching non-Indigenous students or allies that is important, that everybody's culture should be welcome here, and they should be particularly aware and welcoming of the culture on whose land they stand on. And I think for me, that's where this needs to go in the next 10 years. If we can't reach parity, if we can't do all those measures, our students at the very least need to feel like they are welcome here, their families are welcome here, and their communities are welcome here. And their peers need to know that that's okay and that they should encourage that as well.
To me, Indigenous education is about, for example, Canada on the Quality of Life Global Index falls number 6. First Nation peoples in Canada fall number 63. So to me, Indigenous education is about closing that gap. And then as Irene said, there overall the Indigenous population is 370 million, but they occupy about 82% of the biodiversity of the entire Earth. But they don't have control, or they don't have a ability to contribute to how that 82% of the biodiversity is being affected. So for me, that's what education is about, closing all those gaps.
To me, this Indigenous education is about the respect for the lands that we're on, the learning, the ways of learning, knowing, and using those means to learn in these lands. It's about creating that welcoming environment, having people very conscious as they're learning the environment that they're in, the place that they're in, and working with that. I think that we're not true to ourselves and not true to the people if we are importing cultures and languages and so on, of other places and trying to replicate them when we have so much to offer and so much richness right here. And so it's about creating that place, that welcoming place for learning. It's based on the local, the indigenous lands and the population. And it's about respecting the people and working with the people of the land. It's about providing opportunities for the indigenous population, and it's about learning from the indigenous population as well ourselves, and moving that forward. Often I'm drawn to numbers for success and so on. In terms of the success, I want the participation of the Indigenous learners to be at least as reflective, if not higher, than what the norm is in the community. And I say I want it to be higher because the Indigenous population has had such a disadvantage over a length of time that merely having a reflection of that will not be in a way catching up or a parity. It has to exceed that. So it means that in terms of the people who are the educators, it means that in terms of the students in the population, it's sort of reflected in people like that. But it's also about the institution as to how it conducts itself. If the policies that we develop are not reflective of the Indigenous population and being, then there's something wrong that we've got in the policy, and we have to question that. Just like for student success, I think everything that we put in the policy has to lead to student success. In Indigenous education, whatever we provide has to have that pointer as to why we're doing it, and has to point to Indigenous education. If it doesn't, then we've got something wrong.
And to Baldev's point, TRU is open access university, and so we have to look at new ways to remove some of the barriers that are stopping people from coming onto campus. And also in regards to Indigenous education, it's two-way learning, and we have to incorporate that into the classroom, and in everything that we do here, create the space for the two-way learning to occur and ensure that everybody is treated with respect and equality. And those are the touchstones for me.
So, what types of resources, information, support do you need to achieve this vision aside from funding? We can just assume funding is necessary. So what other kinds of things are going to be necessary to help achieve this vision?
This is my favorite topic, so if I can, I'm going to jump in. I can't believe the whole, in terms of data around higher education in British Columbia. It is insane that you cannot access the rates of Indigenous success at different higher education institutions, that the institutions don't have to provide public reports and therefore public accountability on what they're doing with resourcing that they do get, and also just in general on what they're doing to sort of engage with Indigenous communities, ensure that there's Indigenous student success. It's crazy. How can you know how big the gap is or how much work you have to do if you don't know where you're starting? I've been amazed working with the BC, working with Caleb Child and Scott Benwell on the school districts. You can access every single piece of data you need. You know exactly what work schools have to do. Why don't we know that for universities? It's crazy to me.
So, framing that from an institutional perspective, if we want to have change, we want to have the kind of transformation that my colleagues are talking about, then I like to think of it as being achieved through three levers of change. One is investment, which you've said we can't have.
No, we're going to assume. Let's just pretend it will be there.
The other is information, which Celiano is saying at a systems level, we are well short of that in the post-secondary arena here in British Columbia. And the third is influence. So let me speak to the influence side. that's where we learn from each other. What is working well? What are the challenges? And then work on scaling up on that, and or finding solutions by working together on it. So examples will be shared today about that, but it could be as small as a one-to-one contact between instructor and student, or it could be about looking at time to completion and ensuring that we have worked together to share how it is that you and I and our different programs are managing to achieve success. I do think that investment is really important to this, and here at Thompson Rivers University we have been fortunate to have our executive swing in behind and say, yes, we do want to make sure that we put money forward, resources forward, so that we can actually have people focus on Indigenous education outcomes.
Could you just repeat the question for again?
So, what resources, information, and types of support do you need to achieve the vision that we just spoke about with Indigenous education, aside from funding?
So one of the things I look at is in order to achieve that Indigenous vision is having my faculty frame their minds, thinking, learning and knowing in Indigenous ways. And so any of the supports that allow those individuals to become indigenized in terms of how they teach in the classroom and how they work with the environment, the infrastructure and so on, bringing that element in. Most of the people are conditioned in the Western ways and the European ways of learning, and so they're doing what they've learned and experienced themselves. So that's to me a huge cultural change. So helping to bring that about and having the supports in the institutions, into the institution to do that, I think is a element that takes us to where we're going.
You touched on a really important point. It's about leadership. Baldi fronts this at a leadership level, and you need that within institutions, and you need that within government, and you need that across the province, across the country, where you have leadership that guides it and ensures that every staff member knows, ensures that every university, just making sure that that leadership's in there to get to make the levers work.
We do need data. Otherwise, it's like let's just pick off anything. And to your point, we don't have enough investment to do everything. But if we had a chance to say, here's where we could actually do most good effect with the limited resources we have, then that's where we would go. But to not know at a system level, and I'm talking BC system, is folly. We're very fortunate here at TIU that we have a terrific information planning team, and we can ask for any data at all, and that does inform our work. And we've been able to set some targets which we want to exceed, to your point, because of that. It has to be evidence informed.
So at grassroots level, that's where Heather and I fall in, is for me, the most important part is having education programs, that meet their, of course, academic excellence, but at the same time creating that fit without compromising, because the First Nation students, they're not looking for easy ways, right? They're looking for same level of excellence that's delivered. They don't want to fall into these categories of second class. because they have always, they, through our education, through our programming, we want to build their profile at an individual level. So as a water operator working in a high-rated Vancouver facility has same education, same training, same skill levels, same technical expertise as a First Nation operator working in a very small plant. So for me, it's always been about building capacity, building profile, but also building a fit. So at grassroots level, like we have the leadership and we have the support, but at the same time, to be successful with our program delivery, we have to create that fit, so that that education that we're delivering is going to lead to success. It's going to make changes at an individual level, and it's going to make changes at a community level. So.
And something else that I think would be beneficial is to have a platform that allows for best practices to be easily shared for us down at the grassroots levels as well as those at executive. And also what didn't work, because there's so much learning for all of us in that. What were other education providers able to bring in that created success, and what failed? Because it's easy for us to share our good stories, our positive stories, but it's very hard for us to share what went wrong. We could have done something differently. This didn't work, and I feel that there's so much learning from failure as well too. So how can we share that?
These past 2 weeks have been a really emotional experience for me, because Dr. Nathan Matthews was appointed the chancellor of the university, and in his speech he said, I have become a chancellor because there's no barriers for me any longer. There's no racism that was experienced by my ancestors and my forefathers. But then we see what happened in Battleford, where racism is very predominant, and then you go, what? Like, we take one step forward and we take 10 steps backward. So it's just been such an emotional time for all of us.